Masechet Eruvin, Daf Ayin Tet. We're going to continue discussion of the previous Mishnah. We have two more Mishnayot that we will see, all about, well, the first one anyway is about two courtyards that are next to each other, and we are trying to combine them, and either there's a ditch in this case, or we have to make a bridge. So we start off with a ditch, and we said here that if you fill it with pebbles, then it all becomes one, right? If the ditch is empty, then that's like a break. It's like a wall. It's considered two courtyards, and then you have to make two eruvin. But if you fill it with pebbles or dirt, then it becomes all one courtyard, which makes perfect sense. But that's the question. We're going to ask a question on that. Here. Male afar. Afilu bistama. The question is, even if you don't say anything, you just put it in. Regarding hay, we just saw that hay you assume you're going to use because it's food for the horses. And therefore you have to say specifically that the hay I don't care about. I'm leaving it there. I'm not going to use it. I'm putting it in permanently. Otherwise, the default for hay is that you're going to use it and take it out. So now the question is, how about pebbles? Is that the same thing? If you put it in there, do you have to say something? Or do you assume that by default, pebbles you're going to leave there permanently and you're not going to use? From our Mishnah, it sounds like the default is you're going to leave it there. But we have a contradictory Mishnah in Masechet Ohalot, which says, Vatnan, Bayit shemila'uhu teben oserot ubitelo batel. Bitelo in, lo bitelo la. Okay, so we have a house and it has a corpse in it, and it's also full of hay or pebbles. So let's just explain the halacha first. When you have a house and there's a corpse in it, and the house has air in it, at least some airspace, then the tumah of the corpse goes throughout the house, and so anything else under the roof also becomes tameh. But the house also contains it, and so it doesn't go outside of the house. Okay. However, if the corpse is in a house that's full, has no airspace, then the entire house becomes a grave, and then it extends beyond it also. So, in other words, if you have a dead body and it's in it's in a pact and with all stuff around it, then anything's on top of its of the coffin or whatever is going to become tameh as well. You need there to be airspace in order to contain it. This is a practical halacha when bodies need to be transported on an airplane like El Al, and you don't. El Al is a problem. If you put a body in there, now the whole thing is going to be tameh, and Kohanim will have a problem getting on the plane. So what they do actually is they have special coffins in which there is a certain amount of airspace between the body and the top of the coffin, so that it contains it and it doesn't go out. Okay, so this Mishnah is saying that if you had a house with a corpse in it and you filled it with stones and you made them batel, you say, I don't care about these stones, I'm not using them, then it all becomes one, and the tumah can go out of it. Bitelo batel, lo bitelo. But if you didn't have it, then if you didn't do that, then it retains the status of a house. And even though there are rocks in it, the rocks are temporary, and the house will still contain the tumah as if it was airspace. Okay, so how come in Ohalot you have to specifically designate the stones as batel, and over here you don't? There seems to be a contradiction. We're going to see three ways of resolving this. Amar Rav Huna, Mantana Ohalot Rabbi Yosehi. The first way is to say it's two different authorships. But within this there's sub A and B. Right now we're going to say that the Mishnah in Ahalot is the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. And he says you have to designate rocks, and our Mishnah, our Mishnah's author does not think so. Well, hold on, but that doesn't work because we have a statement of Rabbi Yosef the other way around. Rabbi Yosef Afar ve'atid lefanoto harehu kistam teben ve'la batel. He says that, hey, if you're not planning on moving it, it's like the default of dirt, and therefore it's batel. Whereas dirt, if and you plan to move it, is like the default of teben, which you usually move. Therefore, you see that the default of dirt and rocks are included with dirt. The default there is that you're not going to move it. You leave it there, and so you don't need to do bitul. So the Biose would actually make more sense that he's the author of our Mishnah, and in fact, that is what the next opinion says. Ela amar Rabbi Mantana Eruvin Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is the author of our Mishnah, and Masechet Ahalot is a different Tana. Good. That's all. Answer number one. That these two Mishnayot are indeed contradictory, but they are authored by two different Tanaim. However, Rav Huna says that you can reconcile it. Bereh de Rabbi Yoshua Amar, Tum'a Shabbat karamet, Hanach Isu Shabbat, afilu ar nakeh, nameh mebatel inish. You shouldn't compare Shabbat with Tum'ah. On Shabbat, we're dealing with the laws of Mukseh. On Shabbat, even a wallet is going to be has money in it. It's mukseh, so you can't move it, and therefore that will be batel on its own. Rocks, dirt, are mukseh, at least for the duration of Shabbat. So I'm not going to move them. Therefore, if I fill this ditch with rocks and dirt, I'm not going to be able to move them on Shabbat. So that's no problem. Whereas the laws of Tumah, that's not talking about Shabbat. And there, it's going to be permanently there, or not. And so it's not about Shabbat. I have to designate and say I'm not going to move the rocks. Then it becomes one big thing. If I don't say anything, then I probably will move the rocks. Then I'm mukseh all week long. Okay, so that's one answer. Makes sense. Rav Ashi amar bayit acharis karamit bishlam acharis lemi tayemeh ka'eh ela bayit lemi tayemeh ka'eh. So we had a different answer. When you put things in a ditch, you probably think that you're going to leave it there. You want to fill up the ditch. You don't usually put things in a ditch and then take them out. But with the house, what are you going to leave? You're going to leave this hay or these stones in your house all the time? No, you're probably putting it there temporarily to store, but eventually you're going to move them. And so therefore, it's not about the material itself, but rather about the circumstances. And so the circumstances here are what tell you what is the default practice. Good. The next part of the Mishnah talked about two courtyards. And we could just look at the Mishnah quickly because it has this key word here. You have two gezus teraot, two balconies, zo keneged zo, that are opposite one another. And you put a board in between them. So this word that they are opposite one another is what we're going to focus on. Second. Okay, and he says as follows: Amarava hada amart zo keneged zo in zo shelo keneged zo la. So when we say they have to be opposite one another, yes, that works. But if they're not opposite one another, then it's not going to work. So we have, in other words, this picture where you have these two courtyards, balconies, are not opposite each other. So you have to make a diagonal plank. A diagonal plank is not good. I mean, it could shift a little bit. Less than 3 tefachim is considered nothing. But if it's going to be more than 3 tefachim from this edge to this edge, then it's a diagonal. It's not good. That violates zo keneged zo. And also, ולמעלה מזו נמה, לא אומרן אלא שיש בין זה לזה 3 טווחים, אבל אין בין זה לזה 3, גזוז תרא עקומה היא. And similarly, if they're one above the other, right, if they're not on the same level, then if it's going to rise more than 3 tefachim, that's no good. That's a slanted one. It's harder to walk on. People won't want to walk on it, and then that is no good. So it has to be the same height, and it has to be right across from each other. Okay, that concludes this Mishnah. I just feel like I skipped something. Yeah, the Neser, this, I don't think I read this. If you have Natan alav Neser, Avin Shanai Masum Echad, we did Tevin, Mechisa. Okay, I'm missing this statement here that if you had that when you have a board, if you put the board lengthwise across the ditch, then it has to be 4 wide in order to be an opening. But even if you have just a little plank and you put it here, that's sufficient because now the opening is no longer 4, it's less than 4. And so a ditch that's less than 4 wide is no longer considered a ditch anymore. And so that fills it in. And this is, okay. I don't know why I'm missing that piece. Okay, anyway, next Mishnah. Matben sheben shete haserot gavoa asara tefachim me'arabin shenayim ve'en me'arabin echad. Okay, if you have a pile of hay in between 2 fields, then if the pile of hay is 10 tefachim high, it is a separation, and you have to treat the 2 courtyards as separate, and you have to make 2 eruvin and not 1. Now the thing with hay is that it's movable and usable on Shabbat. So if you bring your animals there, elu machilin mikan ve'elu machilin mikan, you can feed your animals from this side, and the other guy in the other courtyard can feed his animals on the stack of hay from the other side. And so now they're both eating from it on Shabbat, and what happens when they eat it? It's going to get smaller. If it goes from 10 to less than 10 tefachim high, then the wall is reduced. And once the wall is reduced, it becomes 1 courtyard, and they have to make 1 eruv altogether and not 2. So certainly if it was already like that before Shabbat, you would not be able to make 2 eruvin. You have to make 1 eruv together. What happens if it gets reduced on Shabbat itself? That's actually kind of what it sounds like, right? That they're eating it, and then you're reading this, and then the next scene is, and now it's less. Now they have to stop all of a sudden on Shabbat. Or is it grandfathered in? If the beginning of Shabbat's okay, now it's okay. The Gemara will discuss that question. Amar Rav Huna belvad shelo yiten letoch kupato ve'ya'achil. Okay, Rav Huna says he's focusing not so much on the Eruv law, but on the feeding animals law here. It says that you're allowed to feed your animals. Rav Huna says, hold on, you cannot take with your own hand from the stack of hay and put it into a basket and then bring the basket to the animal. Why? Because when you're doing that, you're going to take a lot from it, and you're going to end up causing the height of the stack of hay to be reduced. And because you take a lot, and then you're not going to realize that it's lower, and you're going to continue carrying. So therefore, don't do that. Rather, the animals can eat on their own, because the animals only eat a little at a time, and they're not likely to reduce the whole. You have to reduce a 10 amah wide section, right, of the wall to really reduce it. So only if you're filling baskets, that is likely to happen. So don't fill baskets by hand. Okay, that's fine. So what that implies that to bring the animals there and let them stand there and eat would be permitted. This is Rav Huna. Another statement, he says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, name of Rabbi Yochanan, Ma'amid Adam et behemto al gabe asabim b'Shabbat, ve'en ma'amid Adam et behemto al gabe mukseh b'Shabbat. He says that you can bring your animal and put it in front of grass that on Shabbat, and it'll eat the grass. I mean, you're not allowed to pull out the grass. That would be a bisur deoraita. But the animal, if it's hungry, it's permitted. It can eat grass. So you're allowed to do that. But you may not bring it to something mukseh. Why? Mukseh is actually only the Rabbanan. It should be more lenient. Well, that's the very problem. Because it's the Rabbanan, people might become very lenient with it and then take from the mukseh if the animal's not eating well and start feeding the animal. And that's mukseh, so you're not allowed to touch it. So we're not worried that someone's going to pull out grass and feed an animal, but we are worried about someone touching mukseh. And so according to this, one is not allowed to bring an animal to a an area that to a mukseh area. Now this hay is not mukseh because I had in mind I'm going to use it to feed the animal, but it does. We still have a problem because we said you can't take by hand from it and put it into a basket, and so now we have a contradiction because here his first statement implied that you can walk it there and let it stand, and this one is saying it's a problem. You cannot make it walk it and let it stand because you're going to come to do it by hand. So to resolve it, we say not that you're actually leading it directly to the hay, but rather you're standing in back of it so that it can't go anywhere else, and so you're blocking off its way, and then it's so indirectly it will go and find the hay and it will eat, and that's okay. All right, now back to this thing that you said you can't put it in a basket. בית שבין שתי חסרות ומילאהו תבן, מערבין שניים ואין מערבין אחד. We have a braita. The braita is a little bit long, and we're going to analyze all the sections of the braita, so pay special attention to it. But the question on Rav Huna is from the beginning of the braita, because Rav Huna says you cannot put straw into a basket and feed it to the animal, but here it says it's a slightly different case. I have a house that's between two courtyards. It looks like this. So I have two courtyards with a wall, but there is a storage area that is accessible to both the person in this courtyard and the person in this courtyard, and it's a storage area with a roof on it. So as long as this is 10 amot high, that continues the barrier, and so it's two separate courtyards. The problem is they're both accessing it, and so eventually it may become lower, and that would cause a problem. So it's a parallel case to ours. Our case is that the whole thing is made out of hay and it's all outdoors. This is a little bit different because it has a roof. We'll see why that makes a difference. Okay, so it says if they're both filling it up, so that sounds like they're allowed to fill up their baskets with it. And they make two separate eruvin and not one, because that wall plus the pile is a wall. They can both fill their baskets and feed the animals. There you go. You can't get clearer than that. If during the day they're using it so much that it reduces below 10, then they are both prohibit each other from carrying, because now there's one courtyard and they didn't make an eruv together. So what should they do if on Shabbat they still want to be able to, one of them at least wants to be able to carry? So one of the people will lock the door and renounce rights to the rest of the courtyard, and the other person can then go and carry and in his courtyard and take from the pile of hay. We're going to wonder, why does he have to lock his door and also do bitul? In all previous cases we saw, the person offered just to do bitul. Okay. V'chen ata omer, continues the braita, begov shel teven sheben sheneh techumei Shabbat. The end of the braita has another case. This is I have a big pile of hay in between two tichumin. So I have one person over here with tichum Shabbat and 2,000 amot. He gets to this pile of hay, and the other person is 2,000 amot on the other side, and he can also get to this pit with hay in it. So this halacha says that they can both access it, although not in the same place. The pile of hay is in the middle, the pit of hay is in the middle. The person on the east can access the eastern half of it. The person on the west can access the western half of it, whatever is within their 2,000 amot. All right, it's a really completely different case, but it's similar in that there's hay between two accessible areas. Okay, ketani mihat. Anyway, but our question comes from the beginning. That means that one may fill up a basket and feed it to animals, and Rav Huna said you're not allowed to. So what's going on? Amre bayit kevan deika mechitzot v'tikra ki mifchit min kera le mileta hacha la min kera le mileta. Put it in outdoors and indoors is different. What was Rav Huna's worry to begin with? That if you take by hand, you're going to take a lot, you're going to reduce it, you're not going to realize that you're reducing it. And then you're actually not going to have a barrier. You're going to be prohibited from Shabbat, but because you don't realize, you're going to continue carrying on Shabbat without an Eruv. That is only a worry when you're outdoors. When there's a roof on top, then you have something relative to judge it with. So as soon as the hay gets lower, you're going to see the difference between the top of the hay and the roof get bigger, and you're going to say, "Oh, look, now the hay is too low. We better stop carrying. There's no more the eruv. We don't have an eruv. It's we made separate eruvin, and now there's no wall between us. So when it's indoors, we don't have to worry." Okay, good. All right, now other points that come up, because once we quoted this baraita, you said that once it becomes less than 10, then they are both prohibited. Ha-sara shareh. So that means if it is 10 high, then it's considered a wall, and the two are separate courtyards. Afagav demid delaya tikra tuba. And it doesn't matter how tall the ceiling is, because you didn't tell me anything, even if the ceiling is very tall, right? Well, in that case, I can derive that a mechitza, even though it doesn't go up to the ceiling, is still called a partition. Now, this is a discussion that we had. There were many opinions about it several dapim ago, and we left it open. And so this is a question, because here it seems clear. We never quoted this as a proof back then, and this should be a proof that even though this wall doesn't go up to the ceiling, it's still, according to all opinions here, considered a wall. So what would the other side do with this, who think that a ceiling has to go up to the wall, right? But then this should not be considered a wall. Oh, no, they don't have to say that. We could be talking about this house is 13 high, and the top of the hay is 10. So between the top of the hay, which is 10, and the ceiling, which is 13, is only 3. And therefore, anything that's 3 or less is considered lavud, like it's not there. So therefore, this, in fact, it could be a case, we can make it a case that it's all within. That's one possibility. Or another one. Rav Yoshua amar afilu tema bebait asara v'teben shib'a umashehu techol pachot mishelosha kelavud dameh. Or it could be that the hay is 7, just a little above 7, and the ceiling is 10. And so again, it's under 3, and that's considered lavud. And even though the hay is only 7, but you include that lavud area up to the ceiling of 10, and then you have no problem. You have a full wall, halachically a full wall, even though the space of 3. In that case, even if you ate a little bit of it, right, it would go down and under 7, and then you wouldn't have lavud anymore, and you wouldn't be able to carry. So you have a thin margin of error in these cases. Okay, good. Now, Bishlam al Abaye, now Abaye's answer, which was first, that makes more sense with the language of the Braita. Hanuk dekatani me'asara, if it became less than 10, that sounds like the hay was 10. El Ravuna bered Rav Yoshua, my me'asara was mean if it came less than 10, it was only 7 to begin with. We can answer that. Mitorat asara, from the halacha, from the law of being 10. When it was 7 plus 3 empty space, it was considered like 10. And now once you reduce the 7, you no longer have lavud, and you no longer have the halacha of it being like 10. Okay, so they can both fit with the language. All right, now the next section of that baraita says shenehen asurin. Once the wall gets lower, they both are prohibited from carrying. Shema mina diurina ba'in b'shabbat asurin. So should we learn from here that a new situation that occurs on Shabbat will now make it prohibited? For example, if a new person moves into the neighborhood on Shabbat, right, and he didn't join the eruv, he's going to prohibit everybody, even though he joined on Shabbat. So the circumstances change on Shabbat, the halacha changes on Shabbat. On the other hand, we learned in other cases that once it's okay at the beginning of Shabbat, it continues and is permitted the whole Shabbat. Okay, so this case is like a new person moving in. How is it like that? Well, when this becomes lower, right? I had my own courtyard with a full wall. When this becomes lower, all of a sudden this guy moved into my courtyard because now it's all like one courtyard, right? So should we learn from here that a new circumstance now changes the status of the law, and now I can no longer carry on Shabbat itself? That was a big discussion. So we say not necessarily. Maybe it's talking about a case where it already was reduced from before, and it's saying if it happens before Shabbat, then you have to make two eruvin. But you're right. Maybe if it happens on Shabbat itself, it would be okay, and you can continue carrying. Okay, what do you do if you want to let one person carry on Shabbat, and you have this problem? Noel et beto umebatel reshuto. You have to do both. You lock your door and so that you don't use it, and you do bitul. You relinquish your rights to the rest of the courtyard. Tarte, you have to do both. Hachikamar. Oh, Noel et beto umebatel reshuto. You're right. You don't have to do both. Just one or the other. Maybe indeed you do need to do both, because since you're so used to going and walking there and carrying and taking hay from that area, you already started doing it. So therefore you need an extra barrier, and you have to lock your door also so that you won't go and take it, and you need to relinquish so that the other person can claim exclusive rights to it. And who asu, next words of the Braita, who asu v'chaver mutar pishita. Obviously, if you relinquish the rights, you're not allowed, and your friend is allowed. Or we need this clause because what if the situation is where I relinquished and then my friend, he took what he wants and then he relinquishes the rights back to me? So is that allowed? Now I can carry? No, this teaches us that you cannot relinquish and then re-relinquish back. So who asur, or the whole for the whole rest of the Shabbat. Chaver mutar for the whole rest of the Shabbat. The last line of the Baraita about the pit of hay, and it was 2,000 amot away from two different people. Peshita, obviously the person it would be allowed to take from the hay from the whatever is within 2,000 amot of where he is. What are you adding to? What are you adding to my knowledge base? La siricha l'Rabbi Akiva de'amar tichumin de'oraita mahu de'tema ligzor dilma atele achlufe kama shma'lan. Because if I would follow Rabbi Akiva says tichum Shabbat, that 2,000 mot is asum de'oraita. And so you might think that if I permit the person to go to the pit, and he's allowed to only take from the western side of the pit, he's going to make a mistake and he's going to start taking some hay from the other side of the pit that's beyond his 2,000 amot. And so maybe we should make a gezerah and not let him take it all. So this comes to tell you that you don't have to worry about that. We don't make a gezerah, and it's permitted, even according to the Rabbi Akiva, who would say that it's a problem mid the oraita. All right, and now the last Mishnah for the day, and a little bit of a discussion on that. Kesad mishtatefin b'mavoy. Okay, this could have been this could have been an introduction. We have to know, how do you actually do a shituf mevoot? We've been talking about it so much. Well, here's how you do it. Okay, before we read this is giving you an easier way. The truth is that the standard way, right, to make a shiduf mevoot is you have to go to every single courtyard in the mavoy and say, give me some bread, right, or wine. And everybody contributes, and you put it in one of the courtyards. That's the standard way you have to go and collect. The problem is that it's hard to do, right? They're not home, they're not here, they have to go find it. It takes a lot of work. So what we're asking here really is, what's an easier way to make a shituf mevoot? And the answer is, you take one barrel full of food, it's your own. And you say, I am using this, I'm having in mind, this will be for all of the people in the alleyway. And umezakeh lahen ayde beno, and you have to give it to someone. You see, if it's my barrel, I can't lift it and say I'm lifting it on behalf of others because it's already mine. And so I'm not doing an act of acquiring it. Someone else has to acquire it. Okay, so it could be a complete stranger, someone I'm not related to. That would be a simple case. right? I give it to David, and David picks it up. So now it was mine, now it's yours. But David, you pick it up on behalf of everybody in the courtyard. That's fine. But let's say my friends aren't around, but usually my family members are nearby. Can I use a family member to be the other party to acquire it on behalf of everyone? You can always acquire on behalf of everyone because it's a benefit to them. So they don't even have to agree to it. So you can use your son or your daughter who are adults, because they have their own minds. They have their own. They can acquire their own property. Also, with your Jewish slave or maid servant, because they also acquire things on their own. Or with your wife, because she also can own her own property. But not your children who are minors, because minors cannot make their own acquisition and have their own property. If they're property, or if they pick it up, it's just an extension of you. And also not with his non-Jewish slaves and maidservants, because their hand is simply an extension of your own hand, and so it's not transferring transferring the barrel to another party. All right, that is the Mishnah, and we're going to analyze it a bit. Amad Rav Yehuda Chavit shel shitufei mevoot tzarich leagbiya min hakarka tefach. In order to acquire it, someone has to raise it from the ground one tefach. That's how you. That's the act of acquiring something, is by raising it up. Um, Okay, that's why, like in a wedding and things, we ask the chatan to raise up the handkerchief, and that's his the way of acquiring it. Amar Rava Hane tartemile sabet pumpadeta amrinhu, says this. There are two matters that the elders of Pumpadita said, and one of them is what we just said here. Rav Yudah, in fact, was the founder of the yeshiva in Pumpadita, and so Rava, who's a couple of generations later, is now reporting other traditions from Pumbedita, and actually from now to the end of the daf is going to be traditions from the yeshiva of Pumbedita about lots of different subjects. Chadaha. One of them is what we just said. You have to lift the barrel more than a tefach. The other ones, if you make kiddush on Shabbat, then you have to drink a mouthful of wine, two cheekfuls of wine, a couple of ounces. If you did that, good. If otherwise, if you just take a little sip, you did not fulfill your obligation of saying kiddush. All right, that's a good practical halacha to know. Amar Rav Habiba Haname Sabed Pumbedita Amrinu. Oh, I have another halacha from the elders of Pumbedita. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel. Rav Yehuda, in fact, again, right? This from Pumbedita. Taught him, was the Rosh Hashanah Pumbedita, says Osin Medura Lahaya B'Shabbat. For a woman who is in childbirth, or who gave birth to a child, we are allowed to build a fire to warm them up, because they're like a sick person and they need to be warm. Okay, that's a good halacha. Savur mina. Now, when we heard this, we were thinking to ourselves, they give only that particular example. Lechayain lechole la. Only for a woman who gave birth, but not for a general sick person. I mean, obviously, if it's a sick person whose life is in danger, you would be allowed to. But it's saying a general sick people, no, you couldn't. And we were thinking only in the winter could you do this, even for a woman in childbirth, because then it's cold and she needs it. But in the summer, then she wouldn't need it. That's what we thought. But luckily we heard another statement in the name of Shemuel, and this was also in the name of Shemuel. Yeah, it was. Who says even someone who lets blood and it becomes cold, you can make them a fire even on Shabbat, even in the summer. If they need a little warmth, then you can do that. And so this is also a case. Generally, letting blood is not sakanat nefashot. And still, if for that person, it is allowed. So other cases also, one's allowed to make a fire. Amar Amemad, Haname also is a sage from Pumbedita later on. Haname Sabed Pumbedita Amrino. He heard also from other sages of Pumbedita. the itemad ezohi asheras setam. How do you know if a tree is an idolatrous tree, an asherah, and you're not allowed to use it? We had asherah come up yesterday. Funny, it comes up here again, right? There's kind of weaves in. Amarav kol shekomarin shomarin nota ben tomin me peroteha. If you see that the idolatrous priests are guarding it and they won't eat it, then you see that this is an important tree for them. And so, if they're treating it with such respect, it must be it's an Asherah tree, and you would not be allowed to use it. And last opinion, Ushmuel Amar, Kegon Damre Hani Tamre Leshichra Debe Nisrefe Deshatule Beyom Hagam. If you hear them saying these dates are going to be for the beer of this certain temple, which they drink on their holiday, then you know also that it's a tree of Asherah. And this is even lesser than that. Not that they're guarding it all day, but even if they just say something about these dates, and the elders of Pumbedita say we actually follow the halacha of Shemuel for the litmus test to see what is an Asherah tree. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.